Ethan's revenge. I came back from a client meeting to find security already boxing up my office. "You don't have what it takes to run a business, little brother," my sister said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. And just like that, 17 years of my life were erased with a corporate swipe. My name is Ryan Keller. I'm 41. For the past decade and a half, I was COO of Keller Hospitality Group, the hotel chain my grandfather built from the ground up after the war. I wasn't some junior VP who coasted in on a last name. I was the one they called when plumbing broke in Denver at 2 a.m., when a celebrity trashed a suite in Miami, when an investor threatened to pull out of a new build in Seattle. My name didn't just open doors, I kept them open. But none of that mattered the moment Lauren became president. Lauren's my older sister by 3 years. Ivy League, corporate polish, flawless in boardrooms, brutal in private. We've always had tension, too much history, too many unspoken resentments, but I never thought she'd turn it into open war. Apparently, she had. That Monday morning, I was in Atlanta, finalizing a long-delayed contract with one of our biggest long-stay clients. When I landed back in Chicago, I had 3 missed calls from HR. No voicemails, just a calendar invite titled Transition Meeting. That was my first red flag. The second was my keycard not working in the elevator. I had to be escorted up to my own floor by a guy from facilities who wouldn't make eye contact. My office door was wide open. Boxes were already labeled. Personal items stacked neatly like I'd died. And there she was, Lauren, standing by my desk, arms crossed, HR rep beside her, tight-lipped and uncomfortable. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "You're being released from your position effective immediately," she said. Her tone was corporate, cold, a rehearsed bullet point. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "Look, Ryan," she added with that condescending tone she'd mastered in our teenage years, "you don't have what it takes to run a business. You're too sentimental. You're great with people, but this is a different era. We need sharper strategy." She actually said little brother. I looked at the boxes, then back at her. And I smiled. Just once. Sarcastically. Then I picked up the framed photo of our parents from my shelf, the one taken in front of the very first Keller Inn in 1972, and walked out without a word. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I already knew. Lauren had been positioning herself for months, gradually stripping me of strategic meetings, redirecting reports, cozying up to the board. The signs were there. I just refused to see them. That night, I sat in my condo overlooking Lake Michigan. The skyline was quiet. My phone buzzed with a message from Mark, our regional manager in Dallas. "Heard what happened. She's already making changes. Whole org chart is shifting. You good?" I didn't respond, because something else was on my mind. Something Lauren clearly hadn't considered. I wasn't just her brother. I was the architect of our operational backbone. The systems, the vendor relationships, the negotiation records, all of it passed through me. And more importantly, I had backups. I had records. I had leverage. And Lauren? She had no idea what she'd just set in motion. By Tuesday morning, the internal memo had gone out. Leadership transition. Lauren Keller appointed president, Keller Hospitality Group. I read the PDF over coffee. No mention of me. Not a single sentence acknowledging the COO, who'd carried half the company's weight for 17 years. Just glossy phrases like strategic vision, modern leadership, and forward-looking innovation. It read like she'd built the company herself. I didn't get angry. I just opened a notebook and wrote 3 things. 1. Inventory. 2. Leverage. 3. Timing. Inventory came first. Most people think operations are about spreadsheets and checklists. They're not. Operations are about trust. Who calls you at 11 p.m. when the HVAC fails at the Orlando property? Who knows which vendors can shave 15% off a linen order without dropping quality? Who remembers the guest who demands imported sparkling water in room 807 every November? That's what I managed. And I kept records. Every system upgrade, every contract renewal, every backchannel deal, all documented and archived off-site. Not for leverage, originally, just because I was raised to believe the details mattered. My dad used to say, "People lie. Paper doesn't." And I had a lot of paper. Encrypted backups. Offline storage. A private digital ledger with timestamps and annotated notes, including a few things Lauren probably didn't realize I'd seen. like the clause buried deep in the board charter that limited unilateral restructuring of executive leadership without a two-thirds vote, or the email from our San Diego partner expressing concerns about Ms. Keller's temperament, flagged, then buried before it could reach the board. Lauren assumed her title gave her control. She didn't realize I'd built the system she was now trying to manipulate. By noon, I'd compiled a list of every key executive, department head, and regional manager I'd personally mentored or supported through some kind of crisis. I wasn't going to contact them. Not yet. That would be noise. I just needed to remember who might still listen when the time came. Mark texted again. She brought in outside consultants. Total reorg. No one knows where they stand. Typical. Lauren was cutting deep early to create fear. Replace structure with chaos, then centralize power around herself. It might even work, for a while. But chaos leaves cracks. And cracks reveal things. At 3 p.m., I received a call from Donna Whitaker, head of our legal compliance division. She didn't leave a message. Just a missed call. That was interesting. Donna and I had always been professionally cordial, but never close. If she was reaching out, something wasn't sitting right. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened a private drive on my personal server labeled KH_ops_master. The same drive Lauren had once laughed at, calling it my doomsday vault. Inside was every non-public vendor agreement, staff complaint, audit result, and internal memo from the last decade. Not everything in there was damaging, but some of it? Let's just say Keller Hospitality looked a lot shinier from the outside than from within. And now the person least equipped to handle those shadows had taken the helm. As I logged out for the night, I looked at the framed photo of our parents again. The same one I'd taken from my office. Don't worry, I said quietly. I'm not done. I wasn't out for revenge. Not yet. First, I needed to see just how deep Lauren had dug herself, and how fast the walls would start cracking once I quietly removed the foundation. Wednesday morning came with rain. The kind that dims the whole city, makes everything feel slower, heavier. I poured my coffee, sat by the window, and waited for the first crack in her armor. It didn't take long. At 8:42 a.m., I got a message from Stephanie Marks, regional GM for the Northeast. No greeting, just one sentence. Do you know what's going on in Boston? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Boston was one of our flagship properties, a high-margin hotel in Back Bay that I'd personally pulled out of a 6-month slump after a failed renovation. I knew every staff member by name, every supply route, every maintenance shortfall. If something was going wrong there, Lauren was already in over her head. By 10 a.m., it was confirmed. Lauren had cut the long-standing linen contract without notice, switching to a cheaper vendor with no local warehouse. Deliveries were delayed. Housekeeping was rotating towels between rooms. Guests were complaining. Reviews were starting to show it. All because she wanted to boost quarterly margins before the board meeting. I didn't gloat. I just noted it in the ledger under cracks. She was rushing. That meant pressure. And pressure meant mistakes. I spent the afternoon combing through our internal communication platforms. My access had been revoked, officially, but I'd built the underlying messaging system 2 years ago. There were administrative backdoors Lauren didn't know existed because I never documented them publicly. I wasn't looking to spy. I was watching tone. The messages were cautious. Managers asking each other for clarification, second-guessing decisions, waiting for instructions that never came. Lauren had centralized command so tightly that no one knew how to act without her blessing. That's how systems fail, not with a bang, but with hesitation. I bookmarked the thread where one of our West Coast VPs asked, "Are we supposed to delay the San Jose expansion?" I can't get Lauren to answer. That was a big one. The San Jose deal was time-sensitive. Any delay would cost us real money. And I knew Lauren was too focused on the East Coast reshuffle to even notice. By evening, the rain hadn't stopped, but the fog in my mind had cleared. This wasn't about personal betrayal anymore. It was about watching someone take a loaded machine and start pulling wires without knowing what they connected to. She wasn't leading. She was improvising, reacting, hoping momentum would carry her. But momentum dies quickly when no one trusts the driver. I reopened the file Donna had sent me months ago, a flagged compliance review Lauren had brushed aside. It detailed questionable bonus allocations during our last acquisition. Harmless on its own, but linked with the wrong timing, the wrong decisions, and the wrong financial pressure, it could become a fuse. I made another note. Review Q2 bonuses plus acquisition bonuses overlap. The goal wasn't to destroy her. Not yet. It was to show the board what kind of leadership they'd just handed the keys to. I closed my laptop and stared at the dark skyline. The cracks were starting. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to let the silence do the talking. By Thursday morning, the polite silence around my departure had begun to fracture. Not loudly, not publicly, just small slips behind closed doors, the kind people think no one notices. But I notice everything. At 7:11 a.m., I got an encrypted message on Signal. The sender ID was masked, but I knew the writing. Only one person I'd worked with capitalized every subject line like they were titling chapters in a thriller novel. FYI, internal audit flagged the NYC renovation budget. Something doesn't match. No attachments. No signature. Just that. The New York renovation was Lauren's first solo project. Big money, big visibility. She'd pushed me out of that deal months ago, said she needed a fresh start. What she meant was control. No oversight, no legacy systems, no one asking too many questions. So I asked the only question that mattered now: what didn't match? I didn't need access to company records. I had my own. I'd tracked every invoice, vendor quote, and project budget through my final day. I opened the spreadsheet I'd stored offline, a side-by-side forecast versus actual costs. Even in draft form, it was clean, which meant any mismatch had happened after I left. That narrowed the window. I opened my ledger and began building a timeline. January 3rd, Lauren takes full control of the NYC budget. January 14th, procurement approvals shift from operations to Lauren's chief of staff. February 2nd, projected vendor cost increases by 17%. No explanation. March 9th, final payment issued to a vendor I'd never worked with. I dug deeper. The new vendor, Viridian Concepts, had a minimal online presence. Their listed address? A virtual office space in Delaware. No team bios. No portfolio. Just a landing page and a generic contact form. Classic shell structure. I ran the domain through a public registry. It was purchased 6 months ago. The administrative contact? A holding firm registered under the name Crestline Advisory. And the registered contact for Crestline? A man named Evan Holloway, Lauren's ex-boyfriend. Quietly scrubbed from her LinkedIn, but still visible on archived versions I'd saved back when she tried erasing parts of her history. The pieces were snapping into place. Faster than I expected. This wasn't just poor leadership. It was calculated misdirection. She'd moved me out of the way to rewrite the rulebook, and now she was using it to funnel money through ghost vendors with personal ties. I didn't need to shout. I just needed to document. At 2 p.m., I printed every file I had and drove to a private mailbox I still rented under a consulting LLC. I dropped a sealed envelope addressed to one person, Julia Rowe, senior board member, audit committee chair. No email, no text, no trail, just paper. Let the evidence speak for itself. Because sometimes silence doesn't just protect you. It buries the ones who never saw it coming. Friday morning, 6:03 a.m. My phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since the company's Christmas party 2 years ago. Jason Mertz. Corporate security. Former Marine. Quiet, reliable, allergic to gossip. If he was calling, it wasn't social. I let it ring out. 30 seconds later, a text followed. Not here. You didn't hear from me. But someone's been asking IT about old server logs from Q4. Looking for access records. Your name came up. There it was. Lauren was digging. Quietly. Which meant she was nervous. Good. When people like her start to feel the walls close in, they don't scream. They start pulling random wires, hoping to kill the alarm before it gets loud. But she didn't understand how deep those wires ran, or how many I'd buried outside her reach. I spent most of the day off-grid. Left the condo, drove north. No phone, no GPS. Just an old laptop, a thermos of coffee, and a rented workspace in a lakeside town where no one knew my name. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. In that quiet office, I opened an encrypted archive I hadn't touched in months. KH_XRAY. It was a filtered dump of internal messages I'd quietly logged during my final year as COO. Nothing illegal, just patterns, frequency of message flow, team siloing, keyword triggers. One file stood out. A conversation string between Lauren's chief of staff and a mid-tier accounting manager. Repeated phrases like alternative routing, quiet line items, pre-approval under threshold. That last one hit hard. I remembered the policy. Any transaction under $50,000 didn't require secondary approval from finance. It was a legacy rule meant for emergencies, a system I'd helped design. But in the wrong hands, it was a perfect laundering lane. They weren't stealing millions at once. They were siphoning in small, unnoticeable increments, just under the radar, just under my name, until I was removed. It was sloppy, arrogant, and it was her first real mistake. I documented everything. Timestamps, transaction IDs, chain of approvals. Then I created a package titled Variance Theory. No names, just data, charts, and a single summary page written like a white paper. I didn't accuse. I didn't speculate. I presented. At 7:42 p.m. I sent it from an anonymous drop account to 5 board members. One by one. No message. No subject line. Just the document. No one needed to know it was me. Not yet. Let the numbers do the talking. Let them ask the questions. Let Lauren scramble to explain patterns she didn't even know I'd mapped. By midnight, I got one reply. No words. Just a dot. It was from Julia Rowe. The fuse was lit. And now all I had to do was wait for the detonation. Saturday came quiet. No headlines. No board meeting leaks. No corporate memos. But silence isn't safety. It's compression. It means pressure is building behind closed doors, and when it breaks, it doesn't trickle. It explodes. At 9:23 a.m., I received a secure email from an anonymous relay. Only one sentence stood out. There's an emergency audit being assembled. Off the books. No names yet. That was confirmation. Julia Rowe had taken the bait, or more precisely, the evidence. And now she was validating it the only way professionals like her know how. Quietly, surgically, legally. They wouldn't accuse Lauren directly. Not yet. First, they'd dig without her knowing. Cross-check the numbers. Verify the vendor links. Establish that the patterns weren't just anomalies, but fingerprints. And she'd feel it. That shift in air pressure when people around you start hesitating. When conversations shorten. When assistants no longer loop you into everything. Paranoia doesn't shout. It whispers. I left the city for the weekend, drove 3 hours west to a cabin I hadn't used in 2 years. There was no signal out there, no Wi-Fi, just a fireplace, a radio, and a shelf of notebooks I'd kept since my earliest years in the company. I opened one labeled Year 4, Denver. That was the year I cleaned up a mismanaged property that bled cash for 4 straight quarters. Everyone had given up on it. Lauren wanted to sell. I flew out, lived in the manager's office for 2 weeks, and rebuilt the entire staff from scratch. It turned profitable in 5 months. Lauren never thanked me. She just moved on, called it luck. But I never forgot the faces of the housekeepers I retrained, or the night manager who cried when we hit our first positive margin. Those people weren't numbers to me. They were the reason I stayed. And now, Lauren's efficiency measures were slashing teams left and right. People who'd been with us for decades were being replaced with short-term contractors and cold automation systems. It wasn't strategy, it was panic dressed up in PowerPoint. By nightfall, I had 1 bar of reception, just enough for a single text to come through. It was from Stephanie Marks, the GM from Boston. She's asking who sent the audit request. People are scared. I'm keeping quiet. Exactly what I needed to hear. Lauren wasn't sure where the leak came from. That meant she wasn't sure how far it went. And when power becomes uncertain, it doesn't collapse, it corrodes. Slowly, from the inside. I closed the notebook, stared into the fire, and replayed her voice in my head. You don't have what it takes to run a business. She was right. I had something else. I had memory. I had records. I had silence. And it was doing the work for me. By Monday, the machine had begun to seize. No public signs. No statement from the board. But inside Keller Hospitality, the gears were grinding, and Lauren was no longer holding the controls. I didn't need direct access to know it. The signs were everywhere, if you knew where to look. Flight logs showed 2 board members rerouted their schedules to be in Chicago, unscheduled, unannounced. The audit committee issued a temporary hold on non-essential expenditures, citing pending procedural reviews. And for the first time in 18 years, the daily internal ops digest, a report I'd created, didn't go out at 8 a.m. sharp. It was late, then missing, which told me something crucial. People were hesitating, not out of laziness, but fear. Fear of doing the wrong thing under the wrong person at the wrong time. I had nothing to do with it. That's what made it powerful. By 3:14 p.m., my inbox filled with a single automated notification. User access reinstated. Temporary review status applied. Expiration, 14 days. They'd reopen my internal profile. Just like that. No contact, no explanation. But the message was clear. The board wanted to know what I knew, and they didn't trust Lauren to ask the questions. I logged in from a secure terminal. Everything was there. Project folders, vendor chains, policy drafts. Even the messages Lauren thought she'd wiped, still backed up on a shadow archive I'd built after an executive purge 5 years ago. I didn't touch anything, just reviewed, and quietly uploaded one final document to the archive. Title, Structural Integrity. It wasn't a takedown. It was a map, a full systems audit. What Lauren had changed, what was at risk, and what could still be saved. I didn't blame. I didn't accuse. I showed outcomes, numbers, risk levels, timelines. Then I logged out. No message, no announcement, no finger pointed. Let the data speak. At 7:22 p.m., I received a call from a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Eleanor Keller, my aunt, founding board member, my father's sister. I didn't pick up. The voicemail was short. We need to talk. Soon. Preferably before the meeting on Thursday. So that was it. The internal review was over. The board was moving. And Lauren? She'd walked right into her own trap. Not because I pushed her, but because she kept pulling levers she didn't understand. Now the house was leaning, and everyone inside could feel it. I stepped out onto my balcony and looked out over the lights of the city. 17 years of my life, erased in a week. But the foundation? That was still mine, and I hadn't even begun to rebuild it yet. Wednesday, the day before the board meeting. The building looked the same. Same glass facade, same polished marble in the lobby, same receptionist pretending not to recognize me. But something was different. The air was thinner. People nodded but didn't smile. Eyes darted. Elevators arrived slower. That's what corporate collapse feels like. Not fire and sirens, but static tension. Everyone waiting for a sound that doesn't come. I didn't go to my old office. It wasn't mine anymore. Instead, I sat in the executive lounge and watched from a distance. Lauren passed by once, fast-paced, phone in hand. Her face tight, her eyes scanning the room like she was hunting ghosts. She looked smaller, not physically, but her presence, the aura she used to command with ease, it was fractured. Whatever hold she had was unraveling thread by thread. At 2:15 p.m., a junior HR rep, I remembered her name was Kara, dropped an envelope into the internal mail tray and paused. She looked around, hesitated, then walked away. I waited. Then I walked over and took the envelope. Inside, a printed chain of internal messages between Lauren and her chief of staff. Arguments, edits, red lines, panic masked as strategy, and one sentence underlined 3 times. If Keller comes back, I'm done. That told me everything. She knew. The board hadn't told her yet. But she felt it. The shift, the whispers, the door closing inch by inch. And when people like Lauren feel it slipping, they don't apologize. They scramble. By evening, I was back at my condo. I turned on the news. Nothing. Keller Hospitality hadn't made the cycle yet. But finance blogs were catching wind of executive reshuffling and internal governance reviews. It wouldn't stay quiet for long. At 6:42 p.m., I got one final call. Blocked number. I answered. Her voice was calm, but thin, like someone trying to read a speech underwater. I want to talk, she said. Not like before. Just talk. I didn't respond right away. She went on. I made decisions I thought were necessary. I was under pressure. You know how it is. But I didn't answer, because I wasn't the one who needed to explain anything anymore. She filled the silence with a long sigh and hung up. That was the moment she knew. Not when the data leaked. Not when the audit began. But when the one person she'd cut out stopped needing to respond. The next morning, the board would meet. I didn't need to be in the room. My part was already done. I had never raised my voice. But somehow, The system spoke for me. Thursday morning arrived like a held breath. No alarm, no rush, just silence thick enough to feel. The board convened at 10 a.m. behind closed doors on the 41st floor. No press, no staff observers, just 12 people, some of whom had known me since I was a teenager shadowing my father on hotel walkthroughs. I didn't go. Instead, I took a walk along the lake. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that makes the city feel endless. I carried no phone, no briefcase. I wasn't preparing for a return. I wasn't staging a comeback. I was letting the storm complete its cycle. At 11:27 a.m., my old assistant, Michelle, sent a single message from her personal account. She left the room. Didn't say anything. Just walked out. I stopped walking and sat down on a bench overlooking the water. That was it. No dramatic exit. No fiery speech. Just the sound of her heels leaving the room, and the chair she once fought so hard to occupy sitting vacant. I wasn't happy. I wasn't even relieved. I just felt still. The fallout would come later. The PR statement, the realignment, the financial disclosures. The board would spin it carefully. A strategic pivot, maybe. A leadership transition during a time of restructuring. But those were just words. The truth was simple. She lost control because she didn't understand the system she tried to command. She underestimated the memory of the people inside it. She thought the structure could be bent around her without consequence. And she never saw the quiet coming. At 2:04 p.m., I got an encrypted message from Julia Rowe. We'd like to speak, if you're open. No conditions. Just conversation. That was a door. But I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I made one final entry in my private log. Power isn't what you hold. It's what others trust you with when no one's watching. I closed the file. That evening, I drove past the Keller Tower one last time. The lights were still on. The staff still working. Guests checking in, as if nothing had changed. Because that's the thing about true collapse. It doesn't happen on stage. It happens in hallways, over coffee, in the silence between sentences. And when it's done right, no one hears it fall. Lauren would land somewhere, eventually. She was too polished, too connected to disappear. But the stain would follow her. Not from scandal, from doubt. And doubt is slower, colder, harder to escape. As for me, I wasn't walking back in. Not to reclaim a title. I was building something else now. But not loud. Quietly. Where real power lives. A week passed. No news cycles. No formal announcement. Just a line buried at the bottom of the corporate website. Lauren Keller has stepped down from her role as president of Keller Hospitality Group to pursue other opportunities. That was the language of quiet collapse. No scandal. No accusations. Just disappearance, sanitized and signed off by legal. But inside the company, people weren't buying it. You could feel it in the tone of the internal updates, in the way executives were suddenly re-evaluating priorities, in the silence between back-to-back Zoom calls. The organization had been cracked open, not destroyed, but exposed. The new interim leadership team was announced within days. 2 board members, 1 external consultant, and a name I hadn't expected, Donna Whitaker, head of compliance, now acting COO. It was a smart move. She knew where the damage was, and she'd seen who caused it. But more importantly, she'd watched it unfold without being blinded by ambition. Donna reached out to me. Not officially, just a message through Signal. I know you don't want back in, but if you ever want a say in what comes next, this is the window. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I spent time reviewing the damage. Quietly, from the outside. For properties had lost key staff. A major partnership was under renegotiation. Internal morale was fractured, not by failure, but by uncertainty. It wasn't the fire that hurt the most. It was the smoke. Because people don't panic when things go wrong. They panic when no one tells them if it's over. And silence, weaponized silence, has a cost. But mine had purpose. Precision. It wasn't rage. It was restraint. I waited 17 years to learn that. When I finally replied to Donna, it wasn't about a title or a seat. I didn't want my office back. I didn't want an apology. I wanted one thing. Access to a separate fund. A legacy project my father started years ago, meant to modernize rural hospitality infrastructure in states big hotel chains ignored. I asked for complete control over it. No oversight. No reports. Just room to build something real. She said yes, and that was enough. Because I wasn't going to rebuild a tower. I was going to plant roots. The ones Lauren never understood. The ones that didn't need spotlights or boardrooms. Real systems don't shout. They don't break down when a nameplate is pulled off a door. They endure. I walked away from Keller Tower that night for the last time, the city behind me. No grand exit. No headlines. Just a quiet man with his name cleared, his work intact, and the whole blueprint still in his hands. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.